She found the place by getting lost, which was the only honest way anyone ever found the places worth finding. She had been following a live line this time, and not a dead one. A working single-track railroad that ran up a wooded river valley, keeping to the timber above the grade where the walking was hard, but a person going nowhere in particular could not be seen going there. And somewhere in the long green afternoon the ridge she was traversing had pinched down against the river and forced her higher, up over a shoulder of rock, where the timber thinned to scrub, and the footing went to loose stone, and when she came down the far side of the shoulder, she came out above the mouth of a tunnel. The line ran into the mountain here through a portal of dressed stone. A great arched mouth in the base of a cliff, with the rails running into the dark of it, and the river close alongside in its cut, and she had come down the wooded shoulder to find herself standing on the very crown of the thing, 30 feet above the tracks, on the broad stone headwall that capped the portal and held the mountain back from the mouth of the bore. It was old and careful work, the headwall. A great fitted mass of dressed granite blocks laid up in a slow curve above the arch, mossed and ivied now and softened by 100 years of weather but sound. The kind of thing built in an age when men who would never be thanked built to outlast their own grandchildren. And it had outlasted them. And it stood. She had approached it from above and behind. From the one direction no one ever came, because everyone who came to a tunnel came along the tracks, at the level of the tracks, and looked at the black mouth of it and never once thought to look up at the stone crown above the arch, or to wonder whether a person might be standing on it looking down. She stood on the headwall in the green afternoon light and looked down at the rails running into the dark beneath her boots, and understood, in the way she understood most things, all at once and completely, that this was the most invisible place she had ever stood in her life. A person up here was above everything, and behind everything, and in the sight line of nothing. A person up here could watch the whole world go by underneath, and the world would never know to look. She was 20 years old, and she had spent the whole of her life being not looked at, and she had learned to prefer it, and standing on the crown of that tunnel she felt the particular pull of a place that offered her more of the things she had already chosen. And she followed the pull, the way she always did, and went looking along the headwall to see what was there. She had been not looked at as a child, in the way that some children are, present in a house and moving through it and somehow never quite seen, and she had learned early that a person who is not looked at is a person who is not asked anything of, and had made of that neglect a kind of freedom, the way a person will make use of whatever they are given, and had carried it out into the world with her when she left, this ease with being unseen, this preference for the edge of the frame. Most people, she had found, were made unhappy by being invisible. They spent their lives trying to be looked at, waving their arms at a world that would not turn its head. She had gone the other way. She had made invisibility her country and her comfort, and she was good at it, and a place like this, a place built for watching without being watched, was the homeland of it, and she felt she had come home to a country she had always belonged to and never before seen on any map. She carried the whole of what she owned on her back, 30 pounds of it. The same few things that had earned their place over the years, a change of clothes rolled tight, a folding knife, matches in a bread bag, a tin cup, a candle stub, a soft-covered notebook with a pencil in its spine, and under $9 folded in the back that she had not spent in some days. She wanted little enough that she could carry all of it along a stone headwall 30 feet above a live railroad and go poking into the corners of it, and that was what she did, and in the corner of it, where the headwall met the cliff, half hidden behind a curtain of the ivy that had grown down the rock face over 100 years, she found the door. It was set into the masonry of the headwall itself, low and square, an iron door gone the deep even brown of old rust, and its latch was worn bright in the middle of all that brown by a hand that had used it, and by now she knew what a bright latch on a rusted door meant, and her heart did the small lift it had learned to do at the sight of one. She parted the ivy. She worked her fingers under the latch and lifted it, and the door came. Greased, silent, swinging inward into a dark that breathed out at her a still dry air smelling of stone and tallow and old paper and cold ash. And she stooped and went in, off the sunny headwall and into the dark heart of the masonry above the tunnel. And she was not the first. The room had been built into the great mass of stone that capped the portal, a chamber hollowed and dressed in the thickness of the headwall between the mountain behind and the arch below, and it was small and snug and dry, and it had the shape of a place lived in a long time, and thought about, and made right. There was a bed against the inner wall, iron-framed, its mattress and blankets folded neat. There was a stove, small and black, its pipe rising into a channel bored up through the stone to vent somewhere high on the cliff face where no eye below would ever mark the thread of smoke against the rock. There was a table and a stool and shelving pegged to a frame, and a lantern on a hook, and the fine, even dust of a place shut up for years, lying soft over all of it. She stood just inside the door and let her eyes come to it, and felt the rightness of it settle on her, the snug dry economy of a room made by someone who had needed nothing more than this, and had made exactly this, and no more. But it was not the furnishings that stopped her. What stopped her was the window, set into the outer wall of the room, into the very face of the stone above the tunnel's arch, low down at the level of the floor so that a person had to lie or sit to use it, was a long, narrow slot of a window, glazed. And she went to it, and knelt, and looked out, and down. And she was looking straight down the line. The window looked out over the tunnel mouth and down the tracks the way they ran away from the portal along the river, a clean long view of the rails coming and going. And she understood that whoever had built this room had built it to watch the line, had cut this slot in the stone precisely so that a person lying warm and hidden in the dark heart of the headwall could see every train that came, and went, could watch the whole traffic of the railroad pass beneath and away, and never be seen doing it. It was angled, she saw, the slot, cut through the great thickness of the stone at a careful slant so that it gathered the whole reach of the down-valley tangent into its narrow frame, while showing, from below, nothing but a shadowed slit in the masonry that any eye would take for a weep-hole or a fault in the stone. She knelt at the slot with the afternoon light coming up off the river, and looked down the empty rails and felt the strangeness of the place settle into her, the enormous secret intimacy of it. A room made for watching from inside a stone the world walked past without a glance, and she thought that she had found, at last, the truest expression of the thing she had been looking for down every line she had ever walked, not just to be alone, but to watch, warm and unseen, the world she had stepped out of go on without her. She was still kneeling at the slot when the first train came. She heard it before she saw it, a horn somewhere down the valley, and then the deepening grind and rumble of it working up the grade, and she stayed at the window and watched it come. A long freight, the locomotives laboring at the head of it, and it came up the tangent along the river and bore down on the portal beneath her, and she felt the whole headwall begin to tremble with the weight of it. The stone she lay in shaking, and then the head of the train went into the tunnel directly under her belly, where she lay at the slot, and the roar of it came up through the floor and filled the little room, and car after car after car ran into the dark beneath her, and she lay in the shaking stone and watched the tops of the cars stream into the mouth below and vanish, close enough almost to touch, and not one soul on that train, not the engineer, nor the conductor, nor any eye anywhere on it, knew that 30 feet up in the stone above the portal, a young woman lay warm and dry watching them pass. She watched the cars come, the boxcars and the tankers and the flats with their loads chained down, each one running out of the green day and into the black mouth beneath her, and there was a rhythm to it that took her, the steady streaming of the world's freight into the mountain, all of it going somewhere, all of it bound for places and purposes and people, none of it knowing or needing to know that it was watched, and she the one watching, the still point above the streaming, the eye in the stone, The last car ran under and into the dark, and the roar drew down and away into the mountain and was gone. And the headwall stilled, and she let out a breath and found she was smiling, alone in the dark, the way she had smiled at the water in the tower, a smile of pure private wonder that there was no one to share and that needed no one. Nobody knew she was there. It was the whole of what the place offered, and she was surprised to learn the whole of what she wanted. She lit the lantern as the day went, and the room came up warm and brown around her, and on the table, weighted under a smooth stone, there was a book. Because there was always a book, and she had learned by now what it was and why it was left. And she took it up and carried it to the stool by the cold stove, but she did not open it yet. She sat with it closed on her knees and looked around the little room, the bed and the stove and the slot window with the last light in it, and she thought about the person who had cut a window in a stone to watch trains they would never ride, and she found she wanted, for a moment, to guess at them before the book told her, to meet them first as a question. It was a habit she had fallen into, this guessing, a small private game she played at the threshold of each of these lives before she read them, and she had come to feel it was a kind of courtesy, too, to wonder at a person before you learned them, to let them be a mystery for one evening before the ledger made them a life. She guessed a watchman. She guessed someone whose work had been the line and who had loved it past the ending of the work, because that was who they always were, and she guessed at a man out of habit, and then, looking at the careful neatness of the folded blankets and the particular economy of the small room, changed her guess to a woman, and she was pleased, later, to find she had guessed right, though she could not have said what in the folding of a blanket had told her. Then she opened the book, because the book was the kindness, and the book was the rule, and she had learned, in a rising tank in the dark, never again to sleep in a stranger's house, without reading first the thing the stranger had left to be read. She had been a watchwoman. That was the shape that came up out of the pages, in a careful, upright hand, a woman's hand, and it was a shape the drifter girl had not met before in any of the books, and she read it with a growing quiet. In the years when the line was young and the tunnel new, before the signals and the track circuits that watch a bore now, there had been people whose work was to watch the tunnel with their own eyes, to see that no rock had fallen in the mouth and no obstruction lay on the rails and no thing was wrong, that a train running into the dark at speed could not see in time to stop. And this room had been their post, cut in the headwall with its slot window down the line, and she had been the last of them. She had held the watch through the last years of it, sitting at the slot in all weathers, watching every train safe into the mountain and out the far side, signaling with a lamp by night and a flag by day if ever the bore was fouled. A woman whose whole work was to see and not be seen, to keep hundreds of strangers safe who never knew her name or her face or that she existed. And when the signals came, the automatic eyes that watched the tunnel now, and the railroad had no more need of a watchwoman, she had not gone. She could not, she wrote, make herself stop watching a thing she had watched for 30 years, could not make herself believe the little electric eyes would love the line the way she had loved it, and so she had stayed on, in her post, at her slot, watching the trains for no wage and no reason, but that watching them was the thing she was, keeping a watch no one had asked her to keep over people who would never know she kept it. The drifter girl sat with that a long time. It was the loneliest of all the lives she had found, and it was the one that moved her most, because there was no house-building genius in it. No clever water or borrowed mountain breath, only a woman at a window keeping strangers safe out of nothing but love of the keeping, and the drifter girl understood it in her bones, understood the wanting to watch over a world you had no place in, to belong to it secretly, from above, through a slot in a stone, on your own terms and unseen. She read on. The watchwoman wrote about the trains, the ones she knew by their sound and their times, the crews she had watched grow old at their throttles over the years and never once spoken to, the passengers in the day coaches when the line still ran them, faces at the windows in the seconds before the dark took them, reading, sleeping, quarreling. None of them ever glancing up at the stone above the mouth where a woman sat watching them into the mountain and out the other side, holding, though they never knew it, a kind of vigil over their small streaming lives. She wrote of the one bad night in 30 years when the watch had earned itself, when she had seen in the last light a slide of rock come down across the rails inside the mouth, and had run out onto the headwall with her lamp and swung the red across the down valley dark, and stopped a train she could hear coming before she could see it, stopped it short of the mountain and the stone in its throat, and how the crew had cleared the rock and gone on and never known, would go to their graves never knowing, that a woman in the headwall had held their lives in a swinging lamp for the length of one held breath. She had not wanted them to know. That was the thing the drifter girl understood best of all. The watch was worth nothing if it was done to be thanked. The whole of its worth was in the doing of it unseen. And she wrote about the danger to herself, because there was a danger, and she set the rule for it apart in the middle of a page with a line ruled above and below. The way they all did, when a heavy train labors in the bore below, the tunnel breathes its smoke up through the vents. Open the high shutter and lie to the floor, and let the room clear before you rise, or the smoke will have you sitting up in the dark. She read that twice and looked up and found the high shutter, a small iron flap high in the outer wall above the slot, with a cord to work it, and she understood the room's breathing then, that the same chimney draw that pulled a train's exhaust up out of the tunnel mouth could pull it up through the old ventilation channels into the room, and that a heavy train laboring slow in the bore beneath her could fill her little chamber with its choking smoke faster than she would like, and that the shutter high in the wall was the thing that saved her, drawing the clean air across the top and the smoke out if she opened it in time and kept low while the room cleared. She had not needed it yet. The freight that had passed while she watched had gone through fast and easy and breathed no smoke. But she marked the shutter and the cord in her mind and set the book down knowing the rule before she needed it, which was the whole of the lesson the tower had taught her, that the time to learn the deadly thing about a place is before it comes for you, and not during. And she went to her bed that first night knowing the one deadly thing about her new house, and slept. And in the night a train went through under her fast and light, and the head wall trembled, and she woke and lay and watched the dark, and felt no smoke, and slept again, and woke to a gray dawn and the horn of the first train coming up the valley, and lay at the slot and watched it in, and was. Though she would not have used the word, content, the smoke came on the third day. She was at the slot in the afternoon, watching the line the way she had already fallen into the habit of watching it, the watchwoman's habit. The pull of the window that she understood now was the pull the whole place was built around, and she heard a train come up the valley slower than the others had come, heavier, laboring, and she watched it crawl up the tangent toward the portal, a long heavy freight with too much tonnage for the grade, the locomotives at its head working at a walk, throwing their exhausts straight up in hard black stacks into the still air, and it came on slow and slower and dragged itself into the mouth of the tunnel beneath her at a crawl, laboring. And the bore took it and the smoke of it, and she felt the first of the smoke come up into the room before she smelled it, a warmth and a dimness in the air, and then she smelled it, the hot oil and carbon reek of a straining diesel, and she remembered the rule in the same instant. And she did not sit in wonder, because the tower had taught her not to sit in wonder. And she reached up and hauled the cord and threw the high shutter open and dropped flat to the floor. The room filled above her. She lay with her cheek to the cold plank and watched the smoke roll in along the ceiling in the lantern light, thick and blue-black and climbing down the walls toward her as the laboring train fed it up through the vents faster than a fast train ever could. The whole long, heavy weight of it crawling through the bore beneath her and breathing its exhaust up into her house. And she lay to the floor where the air was still clear and breathed the clean of it and watched the shutter high in the wall doing its work, drawing the smoke across the top of the room and out into the open air of the head wall, out over the tunnel mouth to join the black plume boiling up out of the portal below, and she made herself lie still and breathe slow and wait. because the rule said lie low and let it clear, and the rule had been left by a woman who had learned it across 30 years, and the drifter girl had learned by now to trust the rule over her own fear. She kept her eyes on the shutter and the moving smoke, and made a study of it even in her fear, the way she made a study of every danger she survived, watching how the clean air drew in low at the slot, and crossed the floor and rose, and carried the smoke up and out, understanding the room as a thing that breathed, that had always breathed, that the watchwoman had cut and shaped to breathe exactly so that the same draw of the mountain that pulled a trained smoke up to choke a careless watcher would, with the high shutter open, sweep the room clean over the head of a watcher lying low. It was built to save her. She had only to trust the building and keep to the floor. It took a long time. The heavy train crawled through the mountain for whole minutes, and the room stayed thick above her, and she lay and breathed the clear at the floor and did not rise. And at last the end of the train dragged into the bore, and the feeding of the smoke stopped, and the shutter drew the last of it up and out, and the room cleared from the floor upward. And she rose at last into air gone only faintly bitter, and she went to the slot and looked down and watched the last car of the heavy train crawl into the dark and away. And the great plume thinned and died over the portal, and the valley was clean and green and quiet again, and no one on that laboring train had known that above them in the stone a young woman had lain to the floor beneath their own smoke and waited them through. She sat back against the wall and let the shaking come, late, the way it always came in her, after. Then she took up her notebook and turned to a fresh page and wrote the rule down in her own hand, first thing, before anything else, the way she had come to do, when the tunnel breathed smoke, open the high shutter and lie to the floor. She underlined it twice, and below it she wrote a second line, which was not a rule but which she found she needed to set down all the same. She kept the watch 30 years, and no one knew. And she looked at that a while in the lantern light, and then she went on. The days took on a shape, and the shape of them was the watch. She had not meant to take it up. She had meant only to live in the room, the way she had lived in the others, to keep it and mend it and be alone in it. But the room was built around the slot, and the slot was built around the line, and a person cannot live at a window over a railroad without coming to watch the railroad. And within a week she was keeping the watchwoman's watch without ever having decided to, lying at the slot as the trains came up the valley, knowing them by their sound before she saw them, the light fast freights and the heavy laboring drags, and the one long train of gleaming cars that ran through twice a week with faces at its windows, travelers, reading and sleeping and looking out at the river in the seconds before the mountain took them, and she watched over them as they streamed beneath her into the dark and out the far side, and she found that the watching filled a place in her she had not known was there. The same place, she thought, that it must have filled in the watchwoman, the need to belong to the world sidelong, to love it from above and unseen, to keep a vigil over its small streaming life without ever being asked to or thanked for it or known. She came to know the times of them, the way the watchwoman had, the dawn freight and the mid-morning drag and the evening passenger train, and she ordered her own days around them without meaning to, rising for the dawn train and taking her supper before the evening one, her whole life quietly falling into the rhythm of a schedule kept by strangers who did not know they kept it for her. She kept the shutter cord to hand. She learned which trains would breathe smoke, the heavy slow ones, and she opened the shutter before they came and lay low and let them pass and rose again to watch them out, and she was never caught. She swept the room and aired the blankets over the headwall in the sun, and mended the glazing of the slot where a pane had cracked, and she left untouched the small things that had been the watchwoman's, out of the courtesy she paid all of them. And she took up the lamp that stood by the slot, the signal lamp, and cleaned it and trimmed it, though there was no one now to signal, and the line watched itself with its little electric eyes, because a watch is a watch, and a watchwoman keeps her lamp trimmed even for a signal she will never send. And once, on a gray afternoon, she saw a thing on the rails inside the mouth, a limb come down off the cliff in a blow. And though the line had its electric eyes, she went out onto the headwall all the same, and climbed down the old iron rung set in the stone, and dragged the limb clear of the rails before the next train came, and climbed back up into her room and told no one, and was thanked by no one, and understood, doing it, exactly why the watchwoman had never been able to leave. On an evening in the turning of the year, she lay at the slot with the last light going gold on the river below, and the rails running away, empty and quiet, into the dusk. The watchwoman's ledger closed under its stone on the table behind her, and her own notebook open beside her on the floor. She had lived in the headwall a season now, and the watch had become the whole shape of her. The thing she woke to and the thing she kept, and she no longer thought of it as the watchwoman's watch that she had taken up, but as her own, handed to her not in words but in the plain fact of a slot cut in a stone and a lamp left trimmed. The way the mine had been handed to her in a greased hoist and the tower in a worn ladder. Each of them a life laid down and passed to the next pair of hands that needed it, and she the hands now, the watcher now, the still point in the stone above the streaming world. She was 20 years old. She had a folding knife, a box of matches, a tin cup, and a little under $9 she had not spent, and now had nowhere to spend and did not miss. She had a room cut in the heart of a stone above a tunnel, a stove and a bed, and a slot window down the line, a rule that had saved her, and a lamp she kept trimmed for no one, and a book she had not written full of the loneliest and dearest of all the lives she had found. Below her a horn sounded far down the valley, and she felt the first tremor come up into the stone. And she settled herself at the slot to watch the evening train come up and pass beneath her into the mountain, warm and dry and hidden in the dark heart of the headwall, keeping her watch over the small, streaming lives that would never know to look up. And she reached for her pencil, and she began to write. In a careful, upright hand she was learning from a woman she would never meet. The first line of the keeping of the only home she had ever made her own. And nobody knew she was there. And that was the whole of what she wanted.